And who has the upper hand in the upcoming Xi-Trump summit, the China-US summit, which the entire world is waiting for? As China rolls out the red carpet for US President Donald Trump, it appears to be setting the tone for the high-stakes summit with President Xi Jinping. The issue of democratically governed Taiwan, which China views as its own territory, and weapons sales from the US to Taipei. It is certain to be discussed during the 2 days of meetings between Trump and Xi, which is something that Trump has already specified, that he will be discussing this arms sales to Taiwan with Xi Jinping. Beijing has reiterated its strong opposition to US arms sales to Taiwan, calling on Washington to honor its commitment.
During President Donald Trump's visit to China, the two heads of state will have an in-depth exchange of views on major issues concerning China-U.S. relations, as well as world peace and development. China's opposition to the U.S. sale of weapons to Taiwan is consistent and clear.
Well, Trump said that he would bring up with his Chinese counterpart the case of Jimmy Lai, a veteran pro-democracy advocate and Hong Kong's most vocal China critic. When asked whether Beijing would consider releasing Jimmy Lai, China's foreign ministry answered in negative, calling Hong Kong's affairs China's internal affairs.
Jimmy Lai is the main planner and participant in the anti-China activities aiming at destabilizing Hong Kong. Hong Kong affairs are China's internal affairs, and the Chinese central government firmly supports Hong Kong's judicial authorities in performing their duties in accordance with the law.
Now, Donald Trump says that he expects a long talk with Xi Jinping about Iran. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson condemned the U.S. Treasury Department that sanctioned 12 entities and individuals, including 4 based in Hong Kong, for having links with Tehran.
China firmly opposes illegal unilateral sanctions that lack a basis in international law and are not authorized by the UN Security Council, and we will resolutely safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
And there have been more reactions that have come in as US President Donald Trump departed on a high-stakes visit to China. American citizens have expressed high expectations, with many wishing for cooperation between US and China rather than animosity between the two countries. Listen to these reactions.
EV adoption has been really incredible, and I really would love to see tariffs lifted on the EVs that they make there, because their range is a lot better, and that's something that I know. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of animosity between the two countries that doesn't need to be there. I think that we have a lot that we can learn from China and their technological advancements.
I think it's a beautiful country. I think there's a lot of opportunity for trade between the U.S. and China. And I think, yeah, probably good opportunity to expand together and not be divisive.
It begins with communicating as equals, rather than communicating as one dictating to the other how to behave. But I think there are so many areas where China and the United States could cooperate, could work together. Obviously, there are a lot of business partnerships between China and the United States.
Who has the upper hand going into the US-China summit? I'm now being joined by Lynn O'Donnell, journalist and author from Sydney. Lynn, always a pleasure speaking with you. Let's start right off with the discussion. There have been stark statements that have come in from the Chinese side. This is the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson who mentioned, and this is just on the eve of and just hours before Donald Trump departed for China. He mentioned very clearly that the One China principle is a basic norm governing international relations. China stands firmly against unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law, talking about the sanctions that the US has imposed. And he also mentions that China's opposition is firm to US arms sales to China's Taiwan region, and that is a consistent and clear stance that China has always maintained. Along with this, there are also statements on Jimmy Lai. China seems very rock solid on where they stand. Donald Trump, on the other hand, wants to have a discussion on the arms sales to Taiwan. If we focus on Taiwan in this first response from you, Lynn, how do you see this one going? Do you feel China has already laid out the terms before the discussions even start?
Hi, Siobhan. Thanks for having me again. I think that Taiwan is an intransigent topic for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party overall, and I think that stance has been very clear for a very long time. With Trump's arrival in Beijing, I think Taiwan remains a fairly dangerous issue in the relationship because it touches on sovereignty, military posture and domestic politics all at once. Like I said, Beijing's position has not changed for decades, for a very long time, and Xi Jinping seems to have staked his own legacy on what he calls and what is called generally the reunification of Taiwan with the mainland, because it is seen as a renegade province that should be part of and considered part of the People's Republic of China. If it opposes, of course, Beijing, of course, opposes arms sales to Taiwan because of that sovereignty issue. And Washington, meanwhile, continues arms sales under the framework of the Taiwan Relations Act, but has also been trying to stress that these are for defensive purposes and as a deterrence rather than to encourage any declaration of independence. It's something that both sides are going to certainly discuss, but there won't be any movement and can't be any expectation of movement of the Chinese position on Taiwan as part of China.
I hear your point. So, Lynn, but Donald Trump is still maintaining that he wants to go and have that discussion with Xi Jinping. And on that point, let me bring in our second guest on the show. I'm now being joined by Andrew K.P. Leung, Chairman and CEO, Andrew Leung, International Consultants and Investments Limited, and prominent international China specialist. Mr. Leung, your perspective, do you feel China being as strict on its one China policy regarding Taiwan, and Donald Trump wants to have that discussion? Is China dictating the terms before this summit even starts?
I think there is a great deal of misunderstanding in the international media about the position of Taiwan and President Xi's strategy for Taiwan unification. First of all, Taiwan has never been an independent country, and also Taiwan was part of China dating back to the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty, I'm talking about the 1600s and earlier, when the Ming Dynasty had already an admiral governing Taiwan at that time. And then, of course, after the Nixon visit, Taiwan was deregistered as a country and is not even now recognized by the United Nations as a country. But the United States position on Taiwan is enshrined in the so-called 3 communiques and the 6 assurances of the One China policy. In brief, it means that the United States takes no position on the future of Taiwan, but opposes the change of the status quo by military means, and supports the future resolution through peaceful purposes. Now, as far as President Xi's position is concerned, the Taiwan reunification is top of the China's agenda. He has set the 2049 as the final date, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But of course, that's still putting peaceful unification as top of the agenda, enshrined in 3 national white papers on Taiwan. The last was issued coinciding with the provocative visit of Nancy Pelosi's visit to China. But
Mr. Leung, pardon me,
unification going to be achieved?
Yeah, pardon me, I'm just coming in there, but Donald Trump still hopes to have discussions with Xi Jinping regarding Taiwan. What is Donald Trump even hoping for when China's stance has always remained what it is and it's still exactly where it was?
Well, I mean, I think that the immediate problem is the massive sale of military assets to Taiwan at a time when Taiwan is now led by a known separatist, trying to find a way to plug the hoop, they're pushing the envelope towards independence. Now, most Taiwanese people do not want unification. A vast majority still remain want the status quo. But on the other hand, there is a great misunderstanding about the reference to 2027, repeated by President Xi a number of times. And a lot of the Western media thought that it was a third day for action without realizing it's only a day for readiness. Readiness means deterrence against any form of unilateral declaration of independence, either by Taiwan or by foreign forces. But it doesn't mean that Beijing is going to invade Taiwan by 2027. The preference, as I said, still for peaceful unification through three strategies. The first strategy is military coercion or deterrence. Second, diplomatic and economic isolation. Third, people-to-people exchanges as
I hear your
point.
Peoples Mr. Leung, I hear your point.
Interacting one another.
Yeah, let me bring in Lin over here. Lin, going into the talks, I want to really focus on what to expect during this summit. When you look at what Donald Trump brings to the table, he has the tariffs on his hand, which has been those tariffs reached triple-digit figures a while back. Of course, that's something that both countries will not want to touch upon regarding their bilateral trade. And as far as semiconductor restrictions are concerned, China would be hoping that US lifts up some of those restrictions, and along with the Strait of Hormuz, which is really hurting China in the immediate term. Do you feel Donald Trump carries more cards to the table as of now, Lin?
I think that Trump is going in feeling that he does carry more cards, but I also think he's facing a China that is a little bit more confident than perhaps it should be. Both countries have domestic problems at the moment, and those problems are both being exacerbated by what's going on in Iran. The economic downturn is going to happen and worsen over coming months in those countries that are the biggest customers for China's manufactured products. Now, when people stop buying the manufactured products that China is exporting and that its economy depends on, then the troubles that are coming home to roost for Donald Trump in what appears to be a less than well-planned war in the Gulf, they also come home to roost for the Chinese government. There is a pact that the Chinese Communist Party has with the Chinese population, and that is that life will improve. At the moment, you've got an economic downturn there. You've got reduced growth, significantly reduced growth rates. China needs about 8% growth a year, just as a basal point to absorb school leavers, for instance. But it's got high unemployment, people coming off the land, because agriculture is also suffering. You've got a property downturn. You've got people not wanting to have children, so you have a declining population. And all this feeds into domestic problems that the Chinese Communist Party, the government, likes to deflect. It has a very tight stranglehold, as we all know, on information that Chinese people have access to. So both countries are facing their own problems. Donald Trump is going into midterm elections in less than 6 months, which will most likely curtail his own power and possibly even leave him as a lame duck for the remainder of his term as president. Inflation is up, petrol, gas.
Allow me to just bring in Andrew Leung over there, because that's let me get his assessment on where China stands heading into this summit. Jimmy Lai, Taiwan, Donald Trump wants to discuss both these issues. China has pretty much given an answer before the summit even starts. Mr. Leung, if you could just concisely tell us, where do you feel China positions itself in these upcoming talks?
No, I don't think that there is a Jimmy Lai is the crux of the matter.
Not at all.
But I think the most important thing is that both countries want to recalibrate the relationship. Particularly, President Trump is facing the dawning prospects of the looming midterm elections when the American the prices at the pump is rising, and half of the American people are still struggling with the daily necessities as inflation and costs are rising. But as far as China is concerned, the closure of the port of Hormuz is affecting China naturally because it imports about 40% of China's external oil. But on the other hand, at the moment, even as much as 40% of China's internal electricity supply is now accounted for renewables, and some of the oil passes through to China through overland the Belt and Road Initiative. So the impact of China is still great, but it's much less than a lot of people think. But as far as the meeting is concerned, I think China is now appearing on the table with a much stronger cards than Trump, because Trump thought at first he could coerce China into submission, and then China has newly found a very effective counterweight in terms of its global dominance over processing of rare earths, which are essential for China, for Americans, even top.
And that's a critical point, Mr. Liu. Yeah, and that's a critical point. Rare earths with China, and that's something which is critical to the US as well. So both sides bring trump cards to the table. Strait of Hormuz is one side which is hurting China, but rare earths is what China has, which Donald Trump would be requiring for replenishing the interceptors and other military arsenal that has been depleted during the course of the war with Iran, which still continues to remain because those tensions have not settled even now. We'll need to wait and watch how this one goes. Next 2 days are going to be watched closely from across the world. Lynn O'Donnell, Andrew Leung, thank you so much for joining us. Pleasure speaking with you both.
Thanks.